and welcome to episode number 55 of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast, the show where I talk to introverts who grow their business and make a difference. As always, I'm Sarah Croce, and so happy that you're spending another episode with me today. I'm talking to Mark Asquith. Mark is a serial entrepreneur who has built globally successful design, marketing, software, and digital businesses since he quit his real job in 2005. A passionate podcaster, global keynote speaker, and helpful bloke, Mark is the co-founder of podcast websites and the creator of Excellence Expected. He has a terribly embarrassing beard. I didn't actually see that since we just recorded audio, but that's what he has in his bio. So when I recorded the intro for this podcast and listened to the interview again, because I usually just record the interview and then when it's time to air the show, I go back and listen to the interview, I noticed that we talked about the weather first. And I guess, at least here in Europe, we often do that as an icebreaker to start the conversation. I guess it depends where you live. I remember that living in California wasn't so much of a topic because it's just always sunny, or maybe in June when there's June gloom, it's not as sunny, but otherwise it's not really a thing that you talk about. But here in Europe, where weather always changes, it is always a topic of conversation. I think quite a few of the episodes start with some reference to the weather. The slight problem with that is that I record these interviews in advance and then publish them sometimes 2 or even 3 months later, because besides the weather and seasonal references, the content is actually evergreen. So if you hear me referring to the wrong season, well, that's why, because I've recorded it in, spring, like this one here, and now we're actually moving into summer rather than spring. So I just wanted to clarify that and, give you the story behind that. And maybe that also kind of gives you an idea on how these podcasts sometimes work. I'm not the only one who records in batch and then just schedules them to go live at a later time. Without further ado, here's the interview with Mark. Make sure you enjoy his lovely accent. Hi, Mark. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you, Sarah. What about you?
I'm great. Yeah, we're just moving finally into spring, and I think it's the same for you. So we've had a pretty rough winter.
Yeah, it's been a little crazy here as well. It's certainly clearing up, though. It's a beautiful day today. It actually feels a little bit like nice weather might be around the corner, but let's not speak too soon.
Yeah, I actually have a trip planned to Sicily, so looking forward to that.
Ooh, good choice. Like the sound of that.
Yeah. All right, Mark, besides the official bio that I read in the intro, I'd like you to tell us your story and, kind of weave in the introverted bit. So how did you get started with your business, and how did the introversion kind of affect you as an entrepreneur?
In terms of how I got started with the business, I've got a very typical story, if you like. It's the whole grew up without too much, did the whole corporate thing. I had a bit of an issue with control. I didn't want someone that I didn't really know too well or didn't have that much affinity with controlling what I did every single day. So, if you've got a corporate job, you're very much controlled by people that you're just thrown together with. You don't plan that stuff, do you? So it's interesting that you kind of find it difficult to break away from that. So I did that. And then the kind of next step was really to do some contract work, do some contract training. So it wasn't necessarily having a business. It was like being a freelance trainer, which was great. It was really good money, but it was someone else controlling what I had to do each day, which I think that has always been the challenge for me. So that's when I set up my first business, my first ever web design business, really. And it was just doing kind of little websites for people and really low level stuff. That was a long time ago now. That was probably, maybe started that in 2005 as a bit of a side.
That's what it said in your intro, yeah. He quit his real job in 2005. So yeah.
That's it. And I was doing, long time ago, 13 years ago, it's crazy. And I was doing websites, first of all, kind of on the side as a bit of a side project while I was contracting and doing freelance work as a trainer. But then that became my main thing, and I did that for a long time. But the introversion part of it is quite interesting. Because if you've got a little bit of confidence, people assume you're actually quite extroverted, and you're not. Very often that's not the case. Certainly in the early days, it was a massive impactor on the business because I really found it hard to network. I'm not really a networker. I find like the whole meeting people is it's frankly not something that, I would choose to do. I don't go out there to network and to be found, which when you're starting a business is probably not the best thing to say. That was definitely a problem. And I still now find it difficult. I'm just lucky that I get to network a little differently. I'm normally going in as the owner of a company, or I'm going in speaking at an event or whatever. And that's a very different dynamic to actually having to go in and open conversations up. That was a massive thing in the early days. That whole, holy crap, how do I make the connections when all I want to do is sit behind my desk and do the work? It's a really weird scenario. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what I do and what I did.
So do you remember because now you've made quite a name for yourself, especially in the podcasting world. Do you remember how you did that, or you just kind of stuck with the right people and that's how, word got around?
Well, it's really through speaking. That's the main thing. I mean, obviously, if you're podcasting anyway, you're comfortable talking and you're comfortable being in front of a microphone. And I've never struggled with public speaking. I've never been too worried about doing that, which I find a lot of introverts are like that. They want their own space, they want the time to themselves. But actually, when it comes to being on stage and talking, they don't actually have a problem with that. So that's how I got over that, really. It was, look, I'd rather be the speaker at a place because then people generate conversation with me.
That's quite a big topic on my show because it's true. There's kind of like two camps. There's the introverts who can't even think of speaking on stage. And then there's the other ones who say exactly what you said. It's like, well, I'd rather be the speaker than people come to me. So it's definitely an interesting approach. So that's what you did. Basically, you just pitched different, events and said, hey, I want to be a speaker.
Pretty much, yeah. Just, did start off doing local work, bits of local stuff in the UK. I actually stepped up through it quite quickly. I did 8 months of local stuff, got some good pictures, some good assets of me doing that. And then, did the podcasting conferences, now do sort of bigger media conferences and, hopefully touch wood, just getting in front of bigger and bigger audiences. And it's all with the goal of building the business, building the software business.
Yeah, so let's get into that. Let's get into what you're doing today, mainly, where your revenue comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got two things that I do. The main one is podcast websites, which started life as an online sort of web platform for podcasters. So an all-in-one web solution based on WordPress for podcasters. That's where it started life. It's developing more now into a software company for podcasting. So we've got another couple of product launches coming out this year. And it's very clear that, that's where we need to be with that. It's software, and that's the main revenue. We're building that business. And then I've got my own personal brand, which is really just me creating content, talking about how I, along with Kieran and John, who I work with, are building this business. This is how we're doing this. And in particular, from my side, the why behind doing it and some of the challenges that we face. So my personal brand is very much, sounds bizarre, but it actually acts as quite a bit of a funnel for podcast websites, but it's also a bit of a story brand. It's me just telling the story of why we've done what we've done and how I've done what we've done and the trials and tribulations, the ups and the downs. Yeah, they're the two things that I do really today.
And I see you have a membership site for your personal brand. So kind of for starting entrepreneurs, is that correct?
Yeah, it's less of a membership site. It's more of a community. So it's a little Slack group that I run where people can come and get direct access to me and in a very safe place, talk about feedback and get the right kind of environment set up. So yeah, it's less of a membership in terms of, okay, look, here's a load of content, but it is very much a come and talk to me and get some help when you need it.
Right. So I assume when you first started out in 2005, you said you built websites for people. I assume that now with podcast websites, you don't do the actual building anymore. You have a team that does that?
Well, we aren't an agency. We aren't a company that does builds for people. We are a software product. So you buy our platform and we teach you how to build the site using the onboarding. And you can't come to us and commission a website to be built. We are a platform for people. But we give people the knowledge. We give them the expertise. We teach them how to do it. It's very much a fully handheld process, which is kind of nice. Bridges the gap for people wanting to get their own platform online without really wanting to learn how to build the things. We've made it very easy to do that.
Right. I got it. Okay. Great. Yeah. That sounds like you have quite a few different things going. That's what makes it interesting and no one there to tell you how to do it and how not to, right?
Exactly that. That's part of the fun.
Awesome. Let's talk about I like to refer to them as the introverted superpowers. What would you say? We already talked about how in the beginning it might have been a bit hard to, get your name out, but what would you say is your biggest strength as an introverted entrepreneur?
I think it is sometimes that ability to switch off and turn yourself into a really true introvert, and go and actually be a little bit in your own head. You think a little bit differently generally. I think you see things a little bit differently to what a lot of people do. So I think that's a real strength, is that ability to look at things from your own perspective. I don't think you're really taught to do that very often. And I think that's a massive thing that, well, I suppose we can sometimes think is a bad thing. We can sometimes feel a little bit on the outside because we're doing that. I think if you know how to use that and know how to implement what you're thinking, I think it gets you into places that you wouldn't ordinarily get to, or gives you opportunities that you wouldn't ordinarily have. That ability to think a little bit bigger sometimes as an introvert, because you're not bogged down with so much of the social, I want to say, the pleasantries that a lot of people that are more ego-driven might want to exhibit. So I think that's quite an interesting perspective. But also that communication. It's probably appreciate that there's a subtle art in communication. Being a communicator is as much of a vocation, a bit of expertise as anything else. And the ability to communicate with people and ability to help them through what they're struggling with, because you do see things a little bit differently. That's a real big thing that I think a lot of introverts don't really embrace. They'll just stay in their own shell and kind of not put themselves out there for that, which I understand. So I'd say those were two strengths I try to be aware of.
Since you're running these businesses with partners, is podcast website still with John Lee Dumas?
It is, yeah. John's a big part of it, and Kate, of course, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if he's an introvert or an extrovert. I see him as an extrovert, but I've been wrong before. But if it's not him, then maybe it's someone else that you're working with, who's maybe an extrovert. Do you also see that it's nice to have both, kind of personality types in the business?
It's a funny one, that. Honestly, I'm not sure, because if you think about it, really, if you're the kind of introvert that I am, which is I'm very willing to put myself out there and be in the situations if I need to be, and actually do the speaking and so on and so forth, that accelerates the growth of the business or accelerates the network connections that you build. Actually, there's not that much of a difference in the outcome that you see, in my opinion. I've worked with extroverts in the past, and there truly has been no difference in the outcome. It has always been about playing to each other's strengths. I think as long as you're mindful of that, because an extrovert, ultimately, at the end of the day, they still don't want to be on all the time. They just have more of a tolerance for being on a little bit longer than we probably have. I don't see that really as a benefit of having two types of people. I think it's more about individual strengths.
It's interesting. I just know that I've never had a partner in my business, but sometimes I kind of wish I had, and a more extroverted partner. But I think you're right. It's not necessarily the outcome, but maybe just the balance, because what I've heard before, what you said about, being in our head and seeing that as a positive, to me can also be seen as a negative, where we, spend too much time in our heads and questioning and being too perfect and all of that, where an extrovert would then be helpful to kind of get you out of that state, maybe. So it's just an interesting question that I thought I'd bring up. So,
yeah, I do find it interesting. Just to jump in, I do find it interesting. I think it's just something that, as a personal development piece, it becomes interesting to be able to kind of just jump out of your comfort zone a little bit. Like as an introvert, I'm totally fully aware that I need to have certain qualities that perhaps aren't natural to me. So to be able to go out into a room and be able to go out into a place and do some networking and do some schmoozing, it's like that is just so not natural to me.
You're right. Yeah.
So the ability to be able to turn that on and get better at it, it's like exercising a muscle. It gets better, or it's like a sport. You practice it and your tolerance builds for it. So I think it's a personal development piece. I think it's definitely about realizing where you are perhaps requiring a little bit of growth and actually being conscious to do it. Sometimes as an introvert, especially like after a conference, you just want to shoot up to your room and just go up there and chill out for a little bit. But actually, really, what you should be doing is just have 20 minutes in the party or the networking area or whatever, rather than you have to be there all night. But just that 20 minutes will get you a lot further than not doing that. So I think that's one thing that I've certainly become mindful of and try to actually consciously work on.
Yeah. I think there's definitely great networking tips for introverts, like knowing somebody already and having them introduce you to somebody else. There's all these other tips we're not going to go into, but yeah, I definitely agree with you. What about then a challenge, something that's still nowadays, even though you do have this kind of ambiversion, you can be both, but what's still challenging for you as an introvert?
So I think it is that. Ability to, or not even the ability, but the willingness to just carry on being for extroverted, if you like, at places like conferences. You know, we do a lot of networking because we exhibit at a lot of conferences, I speak at a lot of conferences, and that just gets tiring. You know, that just becomes tiring. And it's amazing because people are fantastic. But at the same time, one of the big challenges is purely just constantly trying to be on for enough time to get a return on, not necessarily return on the investment, but to make going to an event wholly worthwhile. You know, where if you're investing to be a sponsor, you know, you really want to be at everything you do. You know, as a business, it's silly not to go to all of these different opportunities to meet people. And I find that very, very hard. But also just breaking into the conversation still sometimes, you know, I'm not really very good at that still, even though luckily in my circles, I know a heck of a lot of people. It's rare that I find myself like that. But if I'm ever at a party or a conference or in business where I don't know people, I am often the guy on the fringes. You know, I am often that guy. And that is still just very, very challenging. You know, 15 years in, it's still extremely challenging. So I think that's definitely something that I struggle with even to this day.
Yeah. Like you said, I think it can be done. It just takes us more effort. And I don't know if you do this, but I know what helps me is then just build in me time the next day. You know, it's like, okay, I'm completely exhausted after networking. So now I need to have, you know, my morning off just for me time and not go to the brunch or whatever lunch they plan, because that would just be too much.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, my challenge with that completely, honestly, is that I often think, like, well, I'm here really, I should probably make the most of it. And when I go, I have a really good time. I never regret going anywhere like that. But you're right. You're like, I build in a little bit of me time. Like I might book an extra day where I can just relax if I'm at a conference or whatever. But it does become one of those things in my mind where I'm like, well, we've paid to sponsor this thing. I should probably go, you know? And so I'm my own worst enemy with it. Honestly, I really am. I can't win. I'm doomed either way.
Yeah. I mean, if you're still effective and still, you know, pleasant and social, then why not? But for me, it was always the case when I went because I thought I had to. And then I was just so exhausted and, you know, spoke maybe to 2 people the whole night. And so I'm like, well, that's not worth it. So yeah, it all depends how you manage your energy, because it's all about energy, right?
Yeah, I get that completely.
Take me to an aha moment, some kind of story where you just had this big light bulb moment.
So that was definitely when I moved jobs from one kind of corporate job into the next one. So I was like earning 20 grand a year or 18 grand a year. And I moved jobs, went from one city to another, in basically the opposite direction. Same kind of commute, you know, a real kind of soul destroying thing. I sort of went into this job with, I want to say enthusiasm, but that's maybe not the right word for it. More like an appreciation that this was going to be something different, more like a bit of excitement that, you know what, this is something new. And I got to that job the first day that I got there, and it was literally the exact same grey corporate place. It felt like I'd left one job and then walked into the same job, albeit in a different location for a couple of grand a year more. And that was the realization for me that actually, you know what, I can't really deal with this anymore. You know, that was a massive aha for me. It was, look, if I do this and I keep doing this, I'm just going to end up just withering away. It was a real stark realization very quickly on that day. And that was the day that I left doing corporate work. I didn't do it after that day. I didn't go back ever. It was startling because it was like a switch went off, literally like a switch. And, you know, it's been that way ever since. You know, I just shiver at the thought of having to turn up somewhere else, you know, where someone can tell me what to do. So that was a real big moment for me. And I was 23 at that time. So probably a little naive, a little bit more ballsy maybe than I would be now. But I'd say probably naive is the right word.
Did you have any entrepreneur friends who kind of, you know, encouraged that decision, or you were the only one and all your friends had corporate jobs?
So there was probably 2 things. There was one friend who was a contract trainer. So he wasn't freelance. He wasn't really an entrepreneur, but he had his own limited company and he was basically working for other people in corporate, albeit instead of getting paid a salary, he was just invoicing them. And that felt like a logical next step. It's not entrepreneurial as such, but it felt like a little bit more freedom. And he was doing it. The second thing was probably my dad. Like, he's an electrician. He's owned his own business for coming up to 30 years. And that was a long time. And he's just very much, look, it'll work out. You know, he's probably seen most things. He's been at the top. He's been at the bottom. He's been everywhere in between. And, you know, he's still plowing along and enjoying it. So he was very nonplussed by it all. He was just very much, look, it'll work out, crack on. do what you want to do. So that was quite a nice bit of feedback to get at that point.
Here's a question though. Do you think you needed to have that corporate experience in order to know what you didn't want? Or do you think it would have been better if you just went straight to entrepreneurship?
You don't know that you don't like hot food until you burn your mouth. You know, that's how it works. And I think, you need to have done the things that you don't like to understand, maybe not even understand, but to appreciate what you do like. I never think the grass is greener. I'm always like, this is my grass. I'm going to water this until it grows and it's super green. It's interesting because had I not done that, I would probably think to myself, do you know what? I could probably get a job at whatever, however much per year. And it would be easy. I'd go home. I would not think about work and I'd just turn up the next day and it wouldn't be my problem. And actually, that's not one, it's not how my brain works. And two, let's be honest, it's not how work works. People these days, sadly, are bred to take the work home with them. So no, I don't think it would have been a benefit had I not done that. I think I'm grateful that I did do that. I think I would have been worse off for not having that experience.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. I have a teenager who's, kind of has this independent mind as well. And I'm just wondering which way he's going to go, because obviously now, it's a different generation and they all just want to become YouTubers. And it's like, well, do you go straight to YouTubing or maybe should you start somewhere else? So,
Well, you know what? I think that's another interesting perspective as well, is that it doesn't always have to be a start. If you think about all the things that you've done that have led to where you are, you didn't consciously start doing them. You just kind of started.
Went into them, yeah.
Yeah, so, YouTube can run. I mean, dedicate half a day a week to YouTube. Go and try some other bits and bobs. I'm a very big believer in just try as much as you want until you realize what sticks and what you enjoy doing. And you can always pull so much experience from so many different places that, something that you learn in corporate, you will always apply forever. So, yeah, I do find it interesting, but you're right. It's a totally different generation. These days, I'm certainly not saying it's easy to do so, but it is easier and more accessible to make money now than I think it's ever been. And what I mean by that is it's easier for the masses. More people can do it quicker than they could before. People were always going to go back in the day. They were going to go buy something and sell it for a profit, but it was only maybe 1 out of 100, whereas now 30 people out of 100 can try something, So you're right, it's a different generation. I often wonder, what would I be doing had I been born 10 years later? I have no idea. Probably be a YouTuber.
You'd be a YouTuber, yeah. Sorry to break the news, but I think you're too old now.
Tell me about it. I'm too old and too grey. I don't understand these new internet telephones.
All right, let's move on to kind of the golden nuggets. I'd like you to share a personal habit that you think contributes to your success, something that you do on a regular basis.
Do you know what? It's a really cliched one, but you got to stay curious and just dive in. I am still so naive. I'm thinking if I see an opportunity or see something that we could try, I'm like, yeah, we should probably try that, and you throw so much stuff out that something sticks. And then, in a year's time, the thing that didn't work gets implemented into something else because you learned something from it. And that's the thing. You got to stay curious and you got to keep interesting. You got to keep doing interesting stuff. So that's definitely a habit that I practice most days is what happens if we do this thing?
Yeah, I like that because habit usually says, well, you have to do the same thing over and over. Well, maybe not. Maybe just the habit is to stay curious. I like that. What about an internet resource and online tool that you use? You mentioned Slack before for your community. Anything else?
Well, obviously, I'm going to say podcast websites is the best. No, I mean, I use so many things. I think for me, ultimately, like Evernote, as boring as it sounds, something like Evernote is wonderful. Pretty much my entire life is organized through Evernote. So I'd just say something like that. Somewhere where you can collect your thoughts is always useful for me. Like kind of lean on it and rely upon it because if you're an entrepreneur, your brain's off in about 1,000 directions. And yeah, Evernote keeps me running, I think.
Cool. What about a book that you would recommend to the Introvert Biz Growth audience and why?
So there's a couple of those ones as well. I think, I forget the author, I do apologize, but it's called Build a Story Brand. And
I'll look it up.
Yeah, please do. Sorry, it's on the tip of my tongue, the author. But Build a Story Brand. And the reason that I'm saying that is that people who are introverted still have stories, and it's easier to tell a story than it is to be a marketer. But the best marketing comes from telling stories. So definitely build a story brand.
Oh, that sounds like a good one. Yeah, because it's true that as introverts, we think we have to come up with these, really amazing, interesting stories and try to make them up when actually it's best to just tell your own story. And that's usually the most interesting one.
Oh, yeah, you can tell it with passion and you can apply it to different contexts. You can really go deep into what makes it usable. I've told the same story that I've told today, in a lot more depth, albeit at different levels, so for introverts and for new startup business owners and for college students, and they take different things from it,
Yeah, that's true. Cool. This has been a really interesting, deep conversation, just like I like them. So thank you so much, Mark.
You're very welcome.
I always end with the mindful ending. So what are you grateful for today or this week, month?
I think just the fact that I can do that, I can stay curious because the people around me allow that. The people that are podcast websites members, the people that follow my podcasts and my audio, my videos and the content that I create, like they allow me to do what I do and to be able to stay a little bit curious and be able to do the fun stuff. So I'm just grateful for those guys turning up every day and letting me help them, but also them helping me in ways that they can probably not even imagine,
That's great. Yeah. Thank you for the internet too, right?
Oh, thank you, the internet. Thank you, Mr. Berners-Lee. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. It was a great pleasure talking to you, Mark.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a pleasure.
That's it for this episode of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. To find out more about Mark, you can go to excellence-expected.com or facebook.com/Mr. Asquith. Also check out excellence-expected.com/free coaching, where he hosts free coaching session every single week. You'll find this episode's show notes at sarahsanacroce.com/episode 55. They're really worth checking out as my podcast editor Tim and his team are doing an amazing job. Definitely check those out every now and then. If you're listening to this show on a mobile device, you can click on the description and you'll actually find all the clickable links there. Talking about clickable links, make sure you check out sarahsanacroce.com/books. My virtual assistant Mara has created a beautiful compilation of 20 of the favorite books of my past podcast guests. So head over to sarahsanacroce.com/books and grab it so you can add some new books to your Kindle reading list. Summer is coming up, so definitely make sure you have enough books ready. And if you'd like to make a contribution to help me make my show a sustainable part of my business, then please go to sarahsanacroce.com/Patreon. This is Sarah Sanacroce signing off from the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. Remember, you need to use your unique introverted superpowers in order to make a difference. Talk to you soon.